Testing, testing. Okay. Alright, I'm going to crank the volume down a little bit. Okay, alright. So, I have a couple new pieces of equipment that are just taking me a little bit of time to set up. That is pretty obnoxious. I've got the light pretty low. And as you can see, I've moved the position of my mic to hopefully catch a little less noise from what's going on the desk. So hopefully that helps matters. We shall see. Okay. Alright, so the other big change I've made is that I now have a different camera for my streaming. So I'm probably going to be tweaking these settings a bit further in the future. But for now, hopefully this is good enough for what we are doing today. So, yeah, a little bit of non-metallic metals for you today. I am going to start off by apologizing if I have to cut this stream short early. The dog is not very well right now, so if she starts being ill, I will need to bail at short notice, so apologies in advance if that does happen. But for now, we are continuing our work on Khagra's Ravagers. Still not sure how to pronounce that. We're most of the way there at this point. Basically what we have left to do is the metallic areas. And also I realized as I was looking at this morning that the base is a little bland at the moment as well. So I'm going to quickly start off just by doing a little bit of work on the base. So I'm taking some of the unthinned white. This is actually one of the reasons that I love using heavy body acrylics so much, is they just are so easy for dry brushing. And just going to use this. Now this is probably not what I would normally have done, but this will give us a nice quick effect, and we can go in with a few kind of washes, homemade washes, to add a little bit of color interest in later on if we want. So that is one. That's two. And I'm trying my luck there. I gotta pick up a little bit more paint on the brush to pull this bit off. Okay, that will do it. It's not amazing, but it's just a little bit more interesting. We can potentially throw some other colors on there a little bit later on. But now, non-metallic metals. I personally find that non-metallic steel is the easiest thing to start with. There are a couple of different ways to go when doing a non-metallic steel. The most common way that you'll see done by kind of the higher end artists is either a blue tint for it if it's a kind of fantasy look, or more interesting subtle color variation influence if it's for a more realistic, reflective of the real world look. But for this particular example, I'm not going to worry about those. It's also going to be a lot harder to achieve those effects with the Zorn palette. I'm merely going to use the black and the white and give ourselves a gradation and talk about what it is that's going to give us that non-metallic metal effect. And so for this, I'm going to start with a kind of middle ground between these two. Alright, this is going to be just a kind of middle color for us to use on the model. And I'm going to do a little bit of painting on this chain on the base. I'm probably going to go over with this color everything that I'm intending to paint steel. Just going to darken it down a little bit further. There we go. That's the kind of grey I'm after. Now, this is just giving us a midpoint that we can start with. It's easier, I find, to have a middle point, even if I leave some areas black and if I have some areas highlighted up white. But this gives me a sense of kind of what the mean I'm looking for is. That average point in the paint process. So here, for instance, the light we've got coming from this direction. So I'm going to paint up this side of the spurs, but I'm not going to paint the other side. I'm going to leave that black, seeing as we've already got it there, and we're almost certainly going to keep that black. Now, on this side, there's going to be less brightness, so I'm probably going to not completely paint those areas. So this is what I mean, right? I want that middle ground, but if I've got shadows there that I know I'm going to keep, I might as well take advantage of them. So I'm getting a little creative with where I'm placing shadows. It's not necessarily completely true for the form, but it should at least look cool. And the rule of cool is, as far as I'm concerned, the most important in miniature painting. So I know that this crest here is where I'm going to have the brightest point in my paint, okay? Because this area here is where the light comes from this direction and bounces to your eye off of the curve here. So I know that that's going to be brighter on all of these, and so I'm going to plan accordingly, and I want something to contrast with that, so a little bit below it we've got our band of shadow. And then we paint the top parts. Okay. A little overzealous with my painting there. Just clean that off. Okay. So for this chainmail here, I'm just going in at a low angle. I really want to try as much as possible to preserve the shadows, seeing as we've got sculpting that's helping us out so much on this. Try and get the camera in a little tighter. Just refocus. There we go, that's a little bit clearer. Hopefully. Just block off this. I'm going to leave the scabbard leathers black, I think. Just it's going to be a little easier. So that's that. Next up is the axe. So again, we know that the brightest point is going to be coming from here, so we can paint that accordingly. Every surface that you're looking at, you need to kind of reduce down into simple shapes so that you can paint them accordingly. Now with the backside, let me do the axe first and I'll get to the backside in a second. So again, light is coming from here, so obviously these upturned areas are going to be in highlight, and the downturned areas right next to them are going to be in shadow, so I'm going to paint up from that. And the reason the downturned areas are going to be in shadow, aside from the fact that you know, it kind of makes sense, is having high contrast areas of black and white right next to each other is really important for the effect that we're going for. Let me see if I can... that's quite a trip. Oop. Okay, that was not effective. I'll try and fix that up if I can. Oh, I've lost focus again. Apologies again, folks. This is a bit of a new setup for me. Okay, but you can see that grey hopefully there. So yeah, having those areas of pure black right next to areas of pure white is an effective way of showing that contrast really clearly. So we're gonna and that really does help sell the metallic effect. So moving on to the back side, I need to mix up a little bit more paint here. Now, when I'm painting the back side of the model, obviously the primary light source is coming from the front. And so to offset that, what I would do is add a secondary light source coming from the back. So again, I've got a middle grey, which is very much not in focus, but is here. It kind of looks like that on the brush, pretty much matches what we have up there. Just strengthen that one a little bit. So the way that I solve the issue of the opposite side of the model is I have a secondary light source coming from 180 degrees. So just kind of one is coming from, hard to show in 2 dimensions, but one is coming from this angle, so I rotate it around 180 degrees, and a secondary smaller one is coming from this angle. And the reason I do 180 degrees is it means that you're not really seeing both of them at any one angle. You're kind of either getting the benefit of one or the other when you're looking at the model. So that's the effect that I try and work with. So here, the blade is obviously going to be much more in shadow, and what I'm going to do, take a little paint off of the brush, I'm just going to give much less highlight to the volume. Okay, so we've already got a lot of this in shadow. The second color I mixed up is actually still a little brighter than my original, but that's okay. And again, we need to paint up the haft of the axe. Now again, I'm keeping the scabbard black, but there is this pattern which looks like it would be etched metal. So we add that. We've got shadow from the cloak playing across this piece. Okay, there we have it. Non-metallic metal. Just kidding. Now I'm going to build up to those highlight areas. So we've got this grey, and moving towards the highlight, we're going to build in additional white. And we don't need this to be completely smooth, but we don't want to make the jumps too severe in one step. So I'm going to try and soften those steps a little bit, catch a little bit on the chains. Now often with chainmail you can kind of treat the highlights and shadows as if the chainmail is a single surface of whatever shape or form, but these vertical chain links seem so distinct that it's almost feels worth it just to kind of treat each column as its own for the purposes of highlighting and shading. But it's not necessary to do that in most cases. So hopefully what you can see even with just the addition of these relatively minor touches is it's really starting to give a sense of high contrast to what we're painting. So we're able to really build this up. Always consider where the light is coming from and how that light is going to bounce off of the surface of the model. Is it going to reach that part of the surface? If not, it should be in shadow. Is it going to bounce straight into your eye, in which case it should be the brightest highlight? And if it's somewhere in between, kind of, you know, how far off of it is it for your eye? And then adjust your brightness value accordingly. So I'm actually going to increase the area of this a little bit. I'm really not worrying about blending right now. That element of this is going to come later. Doing some rough edge highlights. I just want to, initially I want to pin down exactly where the brightness values are going to be residing so that I'm working consistently as I go. So on this side I'm really treating this color, although it's still quite dark, almost as the final highlight. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we know that this curved surface is going to be the point of brightest reflection, but on this side it's already curved around some, so it's already going to be less pronounced. Okay, I'm gonna highlight up all of the rivets because the rivets are effectively tiny spheres. Every one of them is going to have a point highlight that hits your eye. And because that bit is going to be so much brighter than anything else that you're seeing from that sphere, there's really no point in worrying about catching any of the rest of it too much. If you're really keen, what you can do is, as I am, keep building it up layer after layer. Maybe try and ensure that you've got a ring of black around the edge of it, just for the shadow it casts around itself. Those things will help as well. So okay, switching over to the back, and again we've got the light coming from here, which doesn't give us a convenient edge particularly to reflect off of, but we can kind of fake it with a generous attempt at edge highlighting. And in general, you're probably going to keep the back side of the model a little bit darker than the front side in any case, so it's nothing too, there's no need to go quite as generous in your positioning of highlights on this side of the model. With the smaller pieces, it's a lot easier to kind of be a little bit more impressionistic with it, and those areas are also not really going to need any blending or smoothing of that transition to really work, so it's not so much of a problem. Now we're going to go up to yet another level of brightness, build on what we have before, try and dial it into a finer area as we go. So this is one of those instances where probably wouldn't be a highlight right here along the surface as I just painted on, but it gives it a bit more visual interest. Otherwise, all of the highlight on that surface is focused right at this corner, which gets very flat. So rule of cool applies, as always. Just kind of pick out the things that are going to keep the piece visually interesting. Again, picking out all of our little rivets and studs. Quick slurp of the coffee before it goes stone cold. Oh, a little too late. Never mind. Caffeine will still kick in just fine. Alright. So, yeah, we're continuing to build up, and this is the thing with non-metallic metal, is we're putting in a lot of colors here, layering up in very fine areas. And the key thing here is to remember that we want to go from all the way black to all the way white on most elements where there's going to be some direct reflection into your eye. And that high contrast is really what gives us the sense that it's a reflective surface. Effectively, reflectivity, when looking at it from a modeling perspective, is purely an expression of that degree of contrast, right? So if you've got a super matte surface, it's literally, it's just pure black. If you have a highly reflective surface, sorry, not pure black, but purely the color that it is, with no other value to it, no contrast in play. If it's a reflective surface, it spreads the values across light and dark as you change the angle of reflection of that light. So this is why a metallic surface which is more reflective has more of these values than, you know, a woven cloak, for instance, which probably doesn't have much of a reflective quality to it. Okay. So another jump. This is getting quite a steep jump, possibly a bit too steep of a jump, but I'm sure it will look alright on the night. Pick out the rivets, build those up. Again, and here I'm just, with each successive layer, reducing the area of coverage a little bit, again according to the angle of it, just to give that brightness and a decreasing area of this surface. Force those rivets. Onto the back surface. We've got a bit of brightness there. Probably not going to go any brighter than this color on the back part of the model. Just picking out some of the most prominent corners on this piece. So you also don't have to be completely smooth with this. A lot of the time, if you see sharpened metal or something like that, you get lots of little lines of light and dark, and that can be a very quick way of applying or imitating a blended transition. It's just to kind of go in and cluster your thin lines where you want the highlights to be and spread them out as you move across the surface, and then go in with the darker colors and kind of do some of the same effect. So you can see it there. And you could do a similar effect here. Have it focus right about there and then spread out again. Build it up. Remember, you can't overwork a single area too much or you'll start tearing up your paint. So just let it sit for a little bit, and then you can go back again and reinforce that a little bit more. So just quickly go back in. Go. So gonna just too much. Now, one of the things with an axe blade obviously being curved, you have a lot more interesting shapes to work with, but in particular you want to kind of make sure that this edge between the blade where it's sharpened and where it's not has some definition, which is tricky, requires a little bit of fine brushwork. One other thing I forgot is the reflection you'd get down there on the back side. Okay, and we are now starting to get there with our effect. You can kind of see the contrasts it takes from dark to light across the surface, and we'll continue to build on that. So we're almost up to pure white now. I've just got almost entirely white here, and I'm just gonna kind of build up some of these areas. If you find, this is something that I'm guilty of a lot, if you find an area that you think is a little bit too dark, but you don't want to be as bright as the current color that you're using, resist the temptation to paint it that color anyway. It's going to get you into a lot more trouble than it's worth. Just, you know, either quickly go back and switch out your paint color so that you've got the right color for that area, or leave it and wait until later. But if you take it too bright, it is going to look very off very quickly, so try and resist doing that. Having said that, I am guilty of doing this all the time, so one of those many instances of do as I say and not as I do. The arrows on this shield are quite a challenge to do. It's very difficult to figure out where the reflections would be, except for the curve up here, which is pretty easy. I think I kind of neglected the reflective edge here. That would be tripping for all of them. So, building up that contrast. Okay, so my next step is going to be to start smoothing those transitions. And to do that, I'm actually going to work downwards with a very thinned black. You can also smooth this by glazing towards the middle, but here I just want to go with a thinned black, because in this case I kind of started with good strong shadows. I'm working towards the highlights, so I've got all of those colors on my palette, and shading down is generally a little easier than trying to shade up, because you're not so worried about the chalky effects that you can get from white pigment. So be very careful with applying this. You want it thin, and you want a glaze. This is not a wash, right? If you apply too much liquid, camera is out. Give me 1 second, people. Alright, back again. There we go. Alright, sorry about that. So, if you're applying a wash, you want enough liquid to flow into the recesses of the piece. But with a glaze, what you're really wanting to do is apply an even amount of that paint across the whole surface, minimizing how much it's going to pool in areas. So what I'm doing is I'm just teasing any little bit of excess paint into the area that's darkest so that it's not visible. Just building that up very carefully. I'm also, I'll come back and do that actually. Another case of don't try and do too much with the paint you're currently working on just because you spot an issue. So, glazing in this manner, because I'm using a dark color, I want to lift off in an area that I expect to be dark. If I lift off in an area that I expect to be bright, I'm going to leave a puddle of that dark paint behind. And this is always true. When you lift off your brush, because you're breaking surface tension, you're going to get a little bit of paint left behind. And you want to make sure, with glazing in particular, that you're leaving that paint in the area that you want it to settle. So there we go. Just gonna glaze to that area. Reapply the glaze across this surface. Okay, and hopefully it's visible, but you can see the transitions now are a little bit smoother. We're going to have to wait for that to dry. It's very important with glazes that you do give the paint time to dry. It's got more water in it that needs to evaporate for a given volume, so it will take longer. And whilst we're doing that, I'm just going to go in and carefully black line some of the edges here which have kind of lost the definition from applying the highlights earlier, so you can still see a little sheen of moisture on the area I last glazed, so I'm going to give it a little bit longer. I'm also going to go back in and darken down a few areas that got brightened up a bit more than I'd like. One other thing to mention, and I think I mentioned this in some of my previous live streams, but for some reason gloss black looks darker than a matte black, and I've never been sure why, but matte blacks invariably, as they dry, they kind of end up looking a little grayish. You can see it on the to fix the focus on this, but you can see it on here that this actually looks grey. For some reason it doesn't quite give off the black effect that you'd expect. You can fix that right at the very end by just putting a layer of gloss over some of those areas if you want, or a glossy black paint. The black ink that I have, I don't know why, I was pretty sure it dried slightly glossy, but it actually seems to be a very, very matte paint. So that was interesting experience. So I think we can glaze again. So we're going to glaze once more to the darker areas. Again, mindful where it pools and make sure you're controlling that to your satisfaction. Just trying to smooth out those transitions, especially over the larger areas. The smaller areas, it's not nearly as important really for the effect, but any larger surface area where you've gone for the full transition, you can kind of tell the step changes. There it's really important to build on that glaze to soften those step transitions, because that's really what we're trying to do with the glaze. We are, however, also changing the overall value of the model. So this is where a degree of back and forth comes in, right? We've lost a lot of the brightness on this leading edge of the axe, for instance. It's dulled and muted down quite significantly. So we are going to want to, you know, work up and address that. So to fix that, I'm going to go back to using the kind of cheaty vertical line technique to soften things. I'm actually cheating even further by just straight up pure white for this. Re-establishing those edge highlights is all important. Edge highlights are the area where there's a lot of angle change in a very short area, right? Because if you look at any angle, no matter how sharp, close enough, it curves around, right? That curve may be incredibly small, microscopic, but it's going to curve to some extent, which means that some part of it is always going to reflect into the eye, as long as, you know, it reflects at all. So that is what we're doing when we're edge highlighting is we're kind of copying that effect, exaggerating that curvature to capture the part of it that reflects to the eye. Okay, I'll leave that. A little bit of brightness right there. Okay. So what I'm doing here, just again to exaggerate the shape of the axe, is reducing the edge highlight with each brightening color, getting a nice sharp line right up against that black. This is that high contrast that we're talking about, which really emphasizes the shape of the axe and gives it definition. Okay, and again, need to reinforce that edge here, which is very hard to do because we can't really use the side of our brush as such. We have to paint it in by eye, which is tricky. Okay, and some pure white just for those last highlights on the rivets. Now, I'm actually not going to do quite all of the rivets. I'm going to leave off this one back here that's very much in shadow, and these two down here, but I am going to catch the very tip of those points and a little bit more of the tip of these points. And of course catch these two rivets here. And there we have it, some fairly high contrast metallic effects. The other thing to note is scoring. You can give the impression of scoring with fine light and dark lines. So for instance, if this axe is a little hewn and chipped, which would be understandable from a Chaos Ravager, we can give that impression. Maybe it's even gone past the cutting edge. So we paint in a white line, and then right above it, because this is, instead of being a demonstration, okay, so instead of being a flat surface where there's, you know, kind of just a single layer to it, if there's a score or a nick in the surface, what happens is it folds inwards, right? But because that folds inwards, you can actually already see it here. Normally, when you think of a surface, you're thinking of a sphere where it's light on top and dark on the bottom, as you can actually see on this paper that I've bent into a curve. But when you score it, the opposite happens. The dark is on top and the light is on the bottom, with a harsh transition in between. And the reason that this looks this way, with the dark on top and the light on the bottom, is, again, it's not about, you know, shapes per se. It's about the light, which in this case is right above me, coming down and reflecting away, right? And the majority of the light that reflects off of this surface is coming towards my face, and I can see it. The majority of, less of the light that hits this surface does, because this surface is facing that way. so it's reflecting that way. So that's exactly the same thing that we face when dealing with scores and nicks in a surface, because the bit above, it's cut into it, so the bit above is in shadow and the bit below is catching the light. So we want to reflect that here by painting that black line just above, very slightly, very carefully. Somehow this black paint has gotten very thin. Now, if it's not a very deep score, the shadow is actually going to cover less than the highlight, because you can scrape a surface so little that you get highlight but you don't really get shadow. So just be mindful of that. Another trick you can do to give the edge a chipped look, because you've been edge highlighting this whole time, is you can kind of tap in some dark areas where the blade would have chipped, and actually you do want to try and exaggerate that a little bit right at the end of those big long scores, because there you'd have, you know, almost chipped away noticeably at the surface. So there we go. I'm gonna take the opportunity to darken up this back edge a little bit. Go back to a darker grey and brighten this area up here a bit. Okay, so we can continue working on this back and forth, building up, you know, our highlights and shadows, doing more of the varying strengths of line to personate a slightly uneven surface and fake out our transitions a little bit if we want. But fundamentally, this is non-metallic metal, right? You can see we've got the effect of chips in the blade and scores and marks. We've got curved surfaces, spiky surfaces. This model is pretty good for all of those things. So we're running a little low on time, but I'm gonna quickly try and sketch out the exact same process using a gold effect. Now, I'm going to do this very simply. If I were putting a little bit more attention into it, I'd probably be introducing some of the red for the darker colors instead of just blue. Instead of just black, because that red will help warm up those darker tones. But for the purposes of speed, I'm going to stick with just using our yellow ochre here. And again, kind of like with the grey, I'm going to paint almost all of these surfaces. I'm actually going to focus on this central spike here. So let me just paint up this whole spike. This is probably going to take a few coats because it's the yellow ochre struggles a little bit with coverage against the black. So it's exactly the same process. We're trying to take out this color all the way from pure white to pure black. But instead of going through grays in the middle, we have to move our middle color over to go through. In this case, I'm just using pure yellow ochre. And it also gives us the opportunity, as I mentioned before, of warming up those shadows, introducing more red into those shadows to help give the color warmth. And honestly, you can do that with steel as well. It's difficult because I tend to interpret that as a rusting, like just a subtle patina of rust that's developing. But you can do it. If you actually go with a more aggressive, vibrant red, you can kind of give the impression of like the reflection of a flame and things like that. But let's just build up this yellow ochre quickly-ish. I really don't like subjecting the live stream to a hairdryer, but I might actually do it for this just to exaggerate it. And actually, as we're going, I'm going to start putting in some of those shadows as we go. So this is one of those instances where, again, I'm having the light come from this angle. The light should probably actually come from this angle, but that doesn't work well for the shield. So I'm going to have it come from this angle, fake it a little bit, no one will notice. May need to do this a few times. It's really struggling a little with the coverage, so. We want this to be a pretty solid color because we're going to be, with the use of the black in the shadows, we're going to be shifting the palette towards green, which is actually true for some golds, but we do want to be careful about how much we do that. We still want to keep some warmth, especially in the highlights. So we do want to have a good base coat on the areas that are going to tend to be brighter. Almost there, I think. Not too far off, really. So I'm going to start mixing my first highlight. The first highlight needs to be quite a bit darker than that, so just build off of that one. It's a little better. So we've got a nick in there already that we want to build on, brighten up. Now this is actually a slightly concave surface, so I'm putting, or S-shaped in fact, because it curves up, or it curves around at the top and it flares out at the bottom. So I'm putting my highlights in two places, at the very top and the very bottom, and along this edge obviously, which is really struggling to take the paint. Then a similar thing on the other side, but we'll probably push the highlights on that a little bit less. Now the bottom is a little harder because it actually kind of is convex the whole way around. It's like a sphere, but I do want to exaggerate the shadow right underneath the flare of the upper surface. So to do that, I'm going to build up a little bit of highlight on the lower end of it. Which is not too far from reality. If we were doing this as an entire sphere, we'd have basically a kind of spotlight on it, or as a cylinder we'd have a linear highlight on it, and it just so happens that we're putting that very close to the edge of the piece anyway. So there. I was a little impatient with that centerpiece. It should be should have coated that a little bit better to begin with. I'm just going to dry this off. Say hello to the dog, who's looking very sorry for herself. And back to painting. So this is going to be quite a step change, but we'll kind of smooth over it as we progress. So we're going to go with a line there and a little bit of a highlight there. So we're kind of working around the chip in a lot of ways, and we do want to give the bottom edge of that chip, again the bottom edge, right, because of the angle relative to the viewer and the light, we want to give that a bit of a highlight as well. And again, we are going up to pure white, so we put in a touch of white. I'll move back into focal range a little bit better, sorry about that. So touch of the pure white just to really give that glimmer, glint. Okay, so this kind of upper quarter is actually looking pretty good already. I would maybe shade down a little more in the middle if I had a warmer shadow, but because I don't, I'm actually going to leave this like this, because if I shade that down, it's going to start making the whole thing look very green. So on the back side, we are not going to highlight as much, but I do want to kind of build out the color a little bit more. Move my water pot a little bit closer so I'm not stretching to reach it. Man, I'd forgotten how bad this yellow ochre paint tastes. Just going to brighten that up a bit. Go back in with this slightly brighter colour here. Going with our original yellow ochre into the middle. So not a huge amount of contrast there. We might introduce the tiniest little smidge of black into that middle section. You can't see because the wet palette's not in focus, but you can already see how there's green creeping into this. I can at least. The color representation doesn't quite look right on the camera, but I'm gonna just kind of glaze that into the middle part. And then we'll use that same color to start establishing our shadows on the underside. Going a little too fast, so I need to dry this off. Okay. So again, we're taking that darkest color and really taking it right up to the highlight on this edge over here, because we want that nice high contrast look to it. Now this slight highlight I'm going to use to help reinforce our vertical divide. Probably trace the outer edge as well a little bit. that. Go back up to the top and just sharpen up this edge a little. Okay, already nearly there. So I'm just going to once more take a pretty dark ochre, build up this shadow just very finely. Probably should have used a little less paint on my brush than that. Definitely less paint on my brush than that. That off. Try and clear out where I was a little too generous with that. Going to go back in and brighten this up again because we do want it to be brighter than the other side, and I was a little heavy-handed there. So brighten that up, and then we are going with pure black in the shadow on this side. So a little bit brighter again. Raise this side down a little bit further. Re-establish that sharp central divide. And there we go. Gone very dark. It looks a little anemic because we're not introducing any warmth, but what we can do, just very quickly before I end the show, get a little bit of red, mix it with some yellow ochre, so taking us down to a brown, so I'm adding in some black, so it's mostly yellow ochre with a little bit of red and a little bit of black, just to bring us around to the browns. This is very similar to the browns that we were using on the hair and the fur. And I'm going to take some of that, thin it with water. Glazed medium really would be better, but I have water here, and so that wins. And with that, we're going to glaze over this bottom half. We're not going to worry about the top half, but we're going to try and warm up the shadows in the bottom half to help lighten it. And we're going to have to re-establish our more highlighted areas. after doing this. You know what, we can also glaze in a little bit in the middle here, just not too heavily. So you can actually see this is starting to get quite bitty, pigmented. I'm really stretching the paint further than it can go with the medium available to it, and that's why I should really use a glazed medium for doing this when I'm thinning this quite as heavily as I am, because the binder is not holding across the pigment, or it's not holding the pigment in suspension anymore, so the pigment's starting to drop out of suspension. If you guys are wanting more on the science of paints, Goobertown Hobbies does quite a good intro video, and then Anne Foster, who is painting big on Twitch, and also hosts for Reaper live streams. She actually worked with Reaper on their paint line, so she can tell you huge amounts about this stuff. Saw her the other weekend and she told me huge amounts about this stuff, and now I am much more informed than I was before. Still not as informed as I would like to be. It's one of my goals to kind of grow my knowledge in that area, but definitely more informed than I was. Okay, I think if we just get that central piece in, there we go. I'm happy to call that. So there you have it. Super high contrasty gold spiky bit. Technical term. Alright, well, I think that will do it for today. Now, this is the last live stream where I'm painting Khagra's Ravagers. I will finish them up over the next couple of days, which, as I said before, is really just a case of finishing the metal on them, continuing with the non-metallic metals that I did just now, but repeating it over the rest of the models. And I'll post some of those up on my Instagram account. You can find me there at Raggy Paints. I'll post photos of them up once I'm finished, so you can check out and see what I was up to there. I will be continuing to live stream weekly, but I am going to change the time I stream at. I will probably... Oh, Jorge, how's it going? What brand was the yellow? That is a great question. It is Golden Acrylics. You know what? Using the camera that is actually a microphone doesn't work. Golden Acrylics Yellow Ochre. Now, this is a heavy body acrylic. It's really designed for regular acrylic painting on canvases and the like. But it works for this, and for the Zorn palette, as I mentioned in a previous live stream, I really did want to try and use acrylic paints that were as close as possible to what Anders Zorn would have used, which were actually oil paints for his Zorn palette, although he was quite a talented watercolorist when he was younger. But that's the reason that I use these colors. If you have questions about non-metallic metal, hit me up in the comments, and I'll type up some replies. If you want, you can reach out to me on Instagram, as I said, at Raggy Paints. Going forwards for the live stream, I'm a little bit torn as to whether I should switch over to Twitch. I'm probably going to stay on YouTube for a little bit longer. But I will be changing the time, and currently I'm thinking I will go with lunch times on a Monday Pacific, so 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. GMT is my plan. And I guess I can reveal what I will be doing next, which is this bad boy. So I didn't actually really need a Mega Gargant. I don't have in any particular plans to use one in my army anytime soon. That might go well with my Gloomspite Gits, but really the reason that I got this is because I read a phenomenal short story in White Dwarf a couple of months ago, and the protagonist is a Mega Gargant with a little buddy, a Grot who pretends to be the reincarnation of Behemoth. And I really enjoyed the story, and I really wanted to create something that was that character. So I'm going to be working on this guy. I will go right from assembly, and I'll probably be doing quite a bit of kit bashing and resculpting to get him doing what I want. I'm going to get that little Grot dude on his shoulder, the whole 9 yards. So that is going to be my project for the next series of live streams. I think this one will run quite a long time. For those of you that are long-time fans, you'll know that I have painted a Gargant in the past for Warhammer Underworlds for the mod for that, but it was one of the smaller Gargants. And I did a lot on flesh tones in those videos, and I'll probably start putting those videos back out once I've had a chance to curate and edit them. So that will be coming. But yeah, Mega Gargant fun times in the next live stream. So I think it'll probably be noon next Monday, subject to anything that comes up that really causes an issue there. But hopefully it'll be good, it'll be fun, and it'll cover a whole gamut of things. It'll cover painting large models. I'll probably crack out the airbrush. It'll cover maybe some sub-assembly elements in there, kit bashing as I repose the model, and some scenic basing as well. I'm going to do a little bit of that onto his base. So I'll be sketching out ideas this week, and we'll start it all off next week. Hey, Barto! Blood Bowl rematch? Of course. Blood Bowl rematches are great. Alright, well, thank you all for jumping on. Please consider subscribing. Hit the notification bell if you do want to get notified when I'm next going live on live stream. That can be helpful. Throw in comments if you want to know a little bit more about the paints that I used, or the thinking behind them, and how to get the most out of your non-metallic metals. Please do so. I wanted to time this non-metallic metals to line up with at Hobby Mentor, which is a initiative I set up. Has a Discord channel. You can put in the comments if you want a link to that, and I will get you into the Discord channel. Please make sure you select a role when you first join, otherwise the system will kick you out again. Just to stop spam bots is really all that's for. At Hobby Mentors does a periodic kind of self-improvement challenge. It's all about open mentor-mentee relationships, trying to learn from others and share knowledge. But the self-improvement challenge for February is non-metallic metals, building on the one from December, which was light. And as I talked about on this video, the vast majority of NMM techniques is all about the use of light and dark and how light is reflecting into the eyes of the viewer. It's really as simple as that, just with the most reflective surfaces possible. So that is the current plan. Thank you all for joining. If you want to help me out, or just try something new, I am an affiliate of 2 different programs. One is Elric's Hobbies, who do beautiful resin bases. You'll see some of those in my recent videos. The other is Herrick Games, which is fairly local to me, family run, has an online store they ship to all of the US. And with Herrick, if you're new to it, you haven't tried it before, you get straight up $10 off your first order with my affiliate link, so please consider that. For Elric Hobbies, my affiliate link gives you a straight 10% off your orders. So Thank you all for joining, and until next time, later days.